The first thing Yoon did when she met the Vel'khari ambassador was accidentally sneeze on him. It wasn't her finest diplomatic moment. In her defense, the docking corridor smelled like someone had boiled a chemistry textbook, and she'd been holding that sneeze in for approximately 47 light years. The Vel'khari ambassador, 7 feet of violet-scaled dignity in ceremonial robes that probably cost more than her apartment, stood perfectly still while she patted her pockets for a tissue that did not exist. "I said, Yoon, I'm so sorry." The ambassador blinked. He had 4 eyelids and they closed in sequence, which created the effect of a Venetian blind being shut very slowly and very deliberately. "You have expelled biological material," he said. His voice was like a cello being played through a dream. "Onto my person." "I have," Yoon agreed. "Yes, I have done that." Behind her, she could hear Lieutenant Vasquez developing a coughing fit that was doing absolutely no work as a cover for laughter. The ambassador's name was Sarath-En, and he was the 3rd highest diplomatic rank in the Vel'khari Convergence, which governed 11 star systems and approximately 60 billion people who had never, in their recorded history of 4,000 years, sneezed on a foreign dignitary. He looked down at the small biological disaster on his robe. Then he looked at Yoon. His 4 eyelids did the Venetian blind thing again. "You are the human representative," he said. "I am," said Yoon. "Yoon Ji-ae, xenodiplomat 2nd class, Earth Diplomatic Corps." She paused. "I want to be clear that I have successfully completed 46 first contacts without incident." "And the 47th?" "We are living it," she said. Something happened on his face. She wasn't sure what. His facial expressions operated on a frequency she hadn't calibrated to yet, and she'd only had the briefing files for 6 weeks, and the briefing files had been very focused on trade protocol and not at all focused on what to do when you sneezed on the man you were supposed to spend the next 3 months negotiating with. He tilted his head, 4 degrees precisely. "Your species is very strange," he said. "Sir," said Yoon, "you have no idea." The Vel'khari station was called the Convergence's heart, which Yoon thought was a little dramatic until she actually saw it. The structure was a helix, a double spiral of iridescent material that caught starlight and scattered it into colors that shouldn't have been colors, at least not by any human taxonomy of the visible spectrum. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, and she walked into the first doorframe because she was looking at the ceiling when she should have been looking at the door. Sarath-En stopped walking. "Are you injured?" Yoon touched her forehead. "No, I'm fine, that color up there, that blue that isn't blue, does it have a name?" He looked up. "It is called Velsa, there is no translation." "It's like if blue forgot what it was supposed to be doing," she said. "If blue was briefly distracted by the idea of being something else entirely." He looked at her. The Venetian blind eyelids did the thing. "That," he said, "is the most accurate description a non-Vel'khari has ever given." She looked at him. "How many non-Vel'khari have tried?" "You are the first." She filed that away. The first working session lasted 4 hours, which meant it lasted 4 hours longer than anyone expected it to. Yoon had read the diplomatic briefings. The Vel'khari were formal, procedural, allergic to anything that resembled spontaneity. Protocol first, then discussion, then more protocol. The actual content of negotiations typically emerged somewhere around the 3rd day, like a shy animal that needed coaxing. What the briefing files had not mentioned was that Sarath-En was very good at his job. He moved through protocol the way a musician moved through scales, perfectly, efficiently, and with the focused attention of someone who understood that the scales were not the point. He was also, you noticed, watching her. Not in an unfriendly way, not in an evaluating the enemy way, more like the way you watched a card trick, trying to figure out the mechanism, but also willing to be surprised. She asked him, when the protocol portion concluded, and they were ostensibly reviewing trade documents, "How long have you been an ambassador?" He went still. It was a different kind of stillness than his usual perfect composure. This was the stillness of someone who hadn't expected the question. "That is not relevant to trade negotiations," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm asking anyway." The Venetian blind, slow for stage. 40 years, he said. 40 years, Yoon repeated. "And in 40 years, how many humans have you met?" "Prior to today, 11. "And today makes 12. "Today," he said, "makes 12. She looked back at her documents, but she was watching him in her peripheral vision. His hands had gone very slightly looser. The set of his shoulders had shifted by something that probably had a specific Vel'khari name she'd never learn. "For the record," she said, not looking up, "I don't usually sneeze on people I'm about to negotiate with. I want that on the table early." "Noted," he said, and then, very quietly, "I did not find it as objectionable as I should have." She did look up then. His face had done the thing again, the thing she couldn't read yet. She was going to figure out what that thing was if it killed her. The crisis happened on the 4th day, which was, if you were counting, 4 days earlier than the briefing files said crises typically happened. The Vel'khari Trade Council had 14 members, and 3 of them had decided overnight that the human delegation represented an unacceptable contaminant risk to Vel'khari diplomatic purity. The argument was ancient, the same nativist current that ran through every civilization Yoon had ever worked with, dressed up in 4,000 years of ritual language. The humans were too strange, too unpredictable, too much. The formal challenge was issued in the council chamber, which was a room designed to make people feel small. It succeeded. The ceiling was 40 feet up and covered in Velsa blue that wasn't blue, and the 14 council members sat at a curved table that elevated them about a foot above everyone else, which was either an accident of architecture or a very deliberate statement. Yoon sat next to Sarath-En and read the formal challenge as it was being delivered, because the translation was running on a 30-second delay, and she wanted to understand what she was walking into before she walked into it. She understood it by the second paragraph. "They're going to void the negotiation," she said quietly to Sarath-En. "They have the procedural right," he said, also quietly. The set of his shoulders was doing something she'd started to read. This was the shape of barely contained. She didn't have the word for it. It wasn't anger. It was closer to the feeling of watching something careful and good being dismantled by people who'd mistaken caution for wisdom. "Can you counter-challenge?" "It would require grounds." "What grounds do you have?" He looked at her, the Venetian blind but faster, shorter, something she didn't have a word for yet flashed across his face. None that the council would accept. The challenge ended. There was a silence designed for Yoon's delegation to collect their things. Yoon stood up. "I'd like to respond," she said. The translation happened. The council looked at her. 14 pairs of Vel'khari eyes, which meant 56 eyelids, all doing the Venetian blind thing at the same time, which was something Yoon was not going to think about right now. The council chair said something. The translation told her, "You have no standing to respond. The challenge is a Vel'khari procedural matter." "Then I'm not responding to the challenge," Yoon said. "I'm making an observation." The chair consulted with the member on his left. Then, "An observation is permitted." Yoon looked at the council. She looked at the 3 members who'd filed the challenge rightmost seat, 2 from the left, the center. She looked at Sarath-En, who had not looked away from her and whose face was doing the thing she couldn't name. She said 40 years. The translation ran. The council waited. "Your ambassador has been doing this for 40 years, she said. "I have been doing this for 11 years. In 11 years, I have never met anyone who moved through difficult work the way he does, without performance, without the need for anyone to see his effort. He simply does the thing and the thing is done." She paused. "3 of you have decided, overnight, that the risk of talking to us outweighs 40 years of his judgment. I find that interesting." She sat down. The room was very quiet. Sarath-En, to her left, had gone completely still. The council chair said something. The translation. The human diplomat implies that the challenge undermines Ambassador Sarath-En's authority. I don't imply anything, Yoon said. I observe things. The implication is yours. The three challengers were talking among themselves. The council chair was consulting with the members on both sides of him. Sarath-En was a statue except for his hands, which had gone tutta, and then looser, and then tutta again. 2 hours later, the challenge was formally withdrawn. Walking back through the helix corridor, past the Vulsa ceiling, Sarath-En did not speak for a long time. Then, you identified their motivation before I had named it to myself. It was in the second paragraph, Yoon said. The language about purity. It's always about something someone is afraid of losing. What were they afraid of losing? Yoon looked at the ceiling, the blue that wasn't blue. You, she said. The version of you they understood, the one who didn't have complicated opinions about the 12 humans he'd met. He walked for several more steps. You spoke for me, he said. I spoke what I observed, she said. There's a difference. For us, he said, there is not such a difference. She looked at him. The thing on his face, the thing she'd been trying to name since the first day, she thought she had it now. It wasn't a Vel'khari expression. It was something that lived between expressions, in the gap between what a person felt and what they had language for. She recognized it because she had the same gap. For us either, she said, not really. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it should have, and then they both looked back at the corridor ahead, and walked, and the Vulsa light scattered colors that didn't have names across both of them. The secret came out on the 8th day, which was not a surprise, because secrets always come out, and this one had been keeping itself only through the combined effort of two people who were very good at their jobs and terrible at everything adjacent to them. What Yoon had not known, because it was not in the briefing files and would not have been in any briefing files because it was classified at a level she didn't have clearance for, was this. The Vel'khari Convergence prohibited what they called Volmara, a word that translated approximately as the formation of a bond with an outsider. Not a legal bond, not a political bond. The specific kind of bond that happened when two people started to see each other, really see each other, and the seeing changed both of them. It was old law, 4,000 years old, written when the convergence was young and scared and building walls against everything it hadn't made itself. The law had a penalty, diplomatic reassignment, permanent, the kind that meant Sarath-En would never work in this capacity again, and his 40 years of careful, excellent work would be archived and never cited. The law also had an informant, one of the 3 council members who'd filed the challenge, who had, apparently, been watching more carefully than either of them had been watching him. The formal notification arrived at 300 station time, which was either a coincidence or a statement. Yoon read it on her comm unit while sitting on the edge of her bunk, and she sat there for approximately 30 seconds before she got up and went to find Sarath-En. He was standing at the observation port at the end of the residential corridor, looking at the stars, which were not the stars she knew. You got the notification, she said. I got the notification, he said. She stood next to him. The stars were unfamiliar, distant, very beautiful and very cold. Tell me about the law, she said. He told her. His voice was the cello through a dream voice, but quieter. Careful with each word the way you were careful with things you were afraid would break. He told her about Volmara and what it meant and what it cost. He told her about the 4,000-year-old fear that had written the law. He told her about the 40 years he'd spent on the correct side of every line in every context, without exception, because he believed in the work, and the work required the lines. Then he stopped talking. The council will want your recommendation, Yoon said, about the negotiation, whether to proceed with a different human representative. Yes. What will you recommend? He looked at the stars. I have not decided. She looked at him. The thing on his face, she had a word for it now. She'd had it since the corridor 2 days ago, but she'd been calling it something careful and deniable. She stopped doing that. If you recommend the negotiation continue with a different representative, she said, it proceeds. The trade agreement happens. 11 star systems and 60 billion people get better access to resources and medical technology and cultural exchange. She paused. If you recommend termination of negotiations, citing diplomatic contamination, it doesn't. Yes. And your career ends regardless, he said. The law does not distinguish between the choice made and the feeling that preceded it. She absorbed this. That, she said, is a terrible law. It is a very old law, he said. Old laws are not always terrible. Sometimes they are just made by a younger version of a people, when they were afraid of something they no longer need to fear. Are you afraid of it? She asked. What the law is afraid of? He turned and looked at her, really looked at her. The Venetian blind went slow and complete, and when his eyes were open again, they were looking at her with the thing she'd named and couldn't unname. No, he said, I have not been afraid of it since the 4th day. She nodded. The stars were very cold, she was not. I'm going to do something, she said, and I want to tell you in advance because you deserve advance notice. What will you do? I'm going to file a counter-notification, she said. On behalf of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, I'm going to cite the Vel'khari Law as a violation of the Galactic Compact's provisions on diplomatic non-interference. I'm going to request that the Compact Arbitration Board review the law's application. He was quiet. It probably won't work, she said. The Compact Arbitration Board moves like a glacier and the review could take years. You'll still lose your position. The negotiation still goes sideways. Nothing gets fixed fast. Then why? Because, Yoon said, it's a bad law and someone should say so formally, and I'm someone. She paused. Also, for what it's worth, I'm very annoyed on your behalf, and spite is a significant motivator for my species. The thing on his face moved, shifted. She watched him find a new expression, one she hadn't seen before, and she had a feeling it was one that didn't have a Vel'khari name because it had never needed one until right now. You would damage your own mission, he said, for a principle. I would damage my own mission, she said, because you spent 40 years doing careful, excellent work, and you deserve to have someone be unreasonably stubborn about that. The principle is secondary. It is not secondary, he said. It is what you are. She didn't have anything to say to that, so she stood next to him and looked at the unfamiliar stars, and they were quiet for a while. The way you could be quiet with someone when the quiet was full rather than empty. Before she left to file the notification, he said, the word for what you described, the blue that had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. Velsa, she said. It also means, he said, something that discovers it is more than it believed itself to be. She stood in the corridor for a moment with that. Then she filed the notification. It cost her the mission and gained the principle, and those were not the same weight, but they were not entirely different weights either. And somewhere in an arbitration board that moved like a glacier, a 4,000-year-old law started the slow process of being reconsidered. She hoped when she wrote up the incident report that she never had to stop hopping. She didn't.